No one believed him, not the commander, not the council, not even his own mate. General Corrin had warned them for cycles. He had spoken of the ancient texts, buried in the ruins on Anthar Prime writings, that spoke of the Ashwalkers, a forgotten race of two-legged firebringers who scorched the stars long before the Galactic Accord was written. They laughed at him, called him a relic chaser, said his mind had grown old on dust and fantasy. Then the black ships came, no banners, no hails, no declarations, just silence. And then Fire Corrin stood on the observation deck of Dell Station, his triple heart pounding as he watched the sky rip open like the flesh of a dying beast. The first explosions lit up the void with brilliant, silent screams. Hulls split fire, blossomed in the cold, and the station shook under the impact of a single kinetic strike that passed through two defensive rings like they were vapor. He didn't say, "I told you so." There was no time for that. Behind him, the control officers screamed into comms, barked orders, and wept all at once. The shield wall flickered and cracked under pressure that shouldn't exist, not from any species still known. These weren't pirates. This wasn't rebellion. This was methodical. It was brutal. It was human. He knew it the moment the fleet's profile appeared in the war console, not from shape or engine type, but from the pattern. Straight, tight formations, aggressive push through heavy zones, no pause, no retreat. A voice broke through the madness, trembling. "Sir, we have a transmission." Corrin turned. "Play it." A second passed, then a harsh voice came through the channel, rough, deep, unapologetic. No translator needed. It wasn't just language, it was warplane. And raw. "You forgot us." Silence followed, the kind that carried weight, the kind that choked every soul listening. "We didn't forget you." The voice continued, "We just had better things to do until now." Another blast tore through the defense grid. Drill stations, hull alarms howled. "They're targeting the command center, sir." The tactical officer shouted, "No random fire, no waste." Corrin stared at the screen. He saw the ship's emblem, a black triangle over a red field, crude, unrefined, like someone had smeared blood over geometry and called it art. It matched none of the known Alliance factions, not even the Wild Rim warlords. And yet, in the pit of his gut, Corrin felt it. The name echoed in his mind, not from memory, but from instinct. Human. The myths said they vanished, that they burned too bright, too fast, a hyper-destructive, adaptable race that thrived in extremes, but couldn't survive peace. The myths were wrong. They didn't die out. They just went silent until now. The shock of that transmission hung in the air like smoke after a detonation, thick, choking, and impossible to ignore. "We didn't forget you. We just had better things to do." The words hadn't been aimed at anyone specifically, but to Karen, they felt personal, like a blade pressed to his throat by an enemy he'd only read about in whispered legends. Across the deck, officers scrambled. Some barked panicked reports. Others stared motionless, stunned by the efficiency of the assault. A single fleet, coming out of nowhere, cutting through centuries of defensive engineering, like it was wet cloth. No species had ever moved like that, without diplomacy, without demand, without posturing, just force, unrelenting and precise. And now Drell Station, a fortified command hub orbiting the central trade artery of the Galactic Accord, was being reduced to a tomb. General Corrin, a young voice cracked from the side panel. "The echelon carrier Virex is down. Total loss 3,000 souls, sir." Corrin clenched his mandibles, fighting to keep the rage in check. Rage wouldn't save them, only action. Would he turn toward the communications console? "Send word to Prime Accord, Level 7, emergency. Do not wait for confirmation, just send it." Officer hesitated, his eyes wide. "That'll trigger mobilization, interplanetary conscription. We haven't used Level 7 since the Orion collapse." Corrin snapped, "Which happened because we waited too long. Do it now." The officer scrambled, fingers trembling behind them. The main screen showed the invaders' ships moving in near-perfect unison, sleek, dark with engines that bled a strange white-hot energy trail. Each vessel was heavily armed but minimalist in structure. No flashy fins, no unnecessary flares, everything about them screamed practicality, and Death Corrin's mind worked overtime. If they were human, truly human, how had they survived out there? What had they become? The myths said humans didn't care about peace or war. They cared about survival, growth, winning. If that's who they were, then this attack wasn't revenge, it wasn't rebellion. It was reclamation. Redirect all remaining drones to target the lead cruiser, he ordered. Buy us time. Sir, our drones are outdated compared to their. I said buy us time. Not win the battle, we're not fighting for victory, we're fighting to understand what the hell we're up against. Corrin strode toward the tactical station, each footfall ringing like war drums. Bring up a detailed scan of their flagship. The screen shifted there. It was the largest of the invading ships, at least 4 times the size of anything they'd deployed. So far, its hull bore deep gouges, likely scars from other battles, old ones it had fought before many times, and one no active shield detected. The officer said their armor seems kinetic resistant. Our plasma rounds are barely scorching them. Who uses raw armor anymore? Someone muttered. That's primitive. Corrin's eyes narrowed. Number. That's confidence. They didn't need shields. They expected to take hits. They expected to outlast a sudden screech cut through the comms static, garbled speech. And then drill station. This is Commander Grant of the ISS Helldiver. You are now under observation by United Human Systems. Cease hostile action and surrender. The voice was different from the first, calm, cold, calculated. It wasn't a demand, it was sentence, and it sounded like someone who'd said those words 1,000 times. Corrin stepped forward, his mandibles twitching. This is General Corrin of Drill Station, Galactic Accord, Sector 17. Identify your fleet and explain your presence immediately. A long pause, then static again. You wouldn't believe us. Try me. Corrin growled. Another beat. Then Commander Grant's voice returned, this time tinged with something dark, not mockery, certainty. We're what's left of the old war, the part of humanity you erased from your records, the part you tried to forget, because we didn't fit your accord. We didn't evolve into something docile. We didn't compromise. We disappeared because we refused peace. Now we're back, and you're standing on our soil. The line went dead. No threats, no count. On just the facts laid out like an executioner's blade. Corrin's body stiffened. Initiate full spectrum scan across historical archives. I want everything on the old war, all references to precord human factions. Now a low murmur spread through the bridge. They were piecing it together. Myths were no longer myths. The Ashwa walkers weren't meta, for they were real, and they had teeth miles below the station on the surface of Arden. Defense Commander Kellen watched the skies ignite from the planetary command bunker. He couldn't see the enemy ships clearly, but he didn't need to. The explosions were visible, even in daylight. Faint blue streaks traced through the clouds, remnants of orbital kinetic bombardment. Kellen turned to his second-in-command, a grim-faced veteran named Horv. They're not probing us. Kellen muttered. They're dissecting us. Horv nodded slowly. Every move's been surgical. They're not trying to dominate us, they're deleting us. Kellen rubbed his eyes. He hadn't slept in 2 days, and the adrenaline was burning out, but he didn't dare rest. We need eyes inside that fleet, he said. I don't care what it takes. Get me someone who can get close enough to see how they think. Orv hesitated. There might be one option. A smuggler goes by Arden, worked the rim routes for years, claims to have seen ghost ships before, swears they were human. Everyone thought he was crazy. Where is he now? In custody, drunk, and yelling at a wall on cell block 6. Kellen's lips curled into a humorless smile. Perfect, bring them. Mean. While aboard the ISS Helldiver, Commander Grant watched the Accord's response patterns like a wolf watching sheep. Learn to run, they're slow, said Lieutenant Marlowe, reading the data, still stuck in bureaucratic protocol. We've hit 3 stations, 6 patrols, and 2 orbital cannons. minimal adaptation. They never fought a real war, Grant said quietly. Not like us, they signed treaties, let other species wrap them in rules. Became soft, we didn't. He rose from his command chair and approached the window beyond the glass. The starfield was alive with wreckage and fire, beautiful, honest. Behind him, a voice spoke. We've intercepted another Accord message, full mobilization, order level 7. They're scared, they should be. Grant turned. Patch me to the fleet. A green light blinked. This is Grant. Continue forward. Sweep, no hesitation. We will not stop until they acknowledge what they did to us, until they understand that humans don't disappear. We regroup, we rebuild, and when the time comes we return with fire. He killed the comms. He didn't need cheers or chants. His soldiers didn't follow him for glory, they followed because they remembered what they lost, who betrayed them. The great silence that followed their exile. Humanity hadn't gone extinct, it had simply gone dark, and now the stars would burn again. The holding cells beneath Idrin F's defense command were little more than recycled cargo crates retrofitted with shock barriers and thin, miserable bunks. They weren't built for diplomacy or for dealing with men like Arden. He sat with his boots on the bench, half drunk, half smirking, his coat stained with old blood, and older liquor hung open, revealing a faded chest plate, once standard to rim freighters. His beard was wiry streaked with gray, and his left eye had been replaced with a black market lens that flickered every few seconds. The door buzzed and Horv entered without ceremony. Arden raised one brow. Well, if it isn't the stormtrooper chief come to kick my teeth in or just insult my heritage. Orv didn't answer. He threw a data pad into Arden's lap. The smuggler blinked at it, then frowned. Images of the Helldiver damage reports, human fleet patterns, intercepted communications. Arden's expression changed. That roguish half mad gleam died out instantly, so he whispered, they finally came back. Orv folded his arms. You said you saw them before ghost ships, backwater legends. I did more than see. Arden muttered. I ran fast as hell. Tell us what you know. Depends what's in it for me. Horvik stepped forward slowly until the red scanner of his helm was inches from Arden's face. You get to live, he said coldly. Arden held his stare for a beat, then nodded. More to himself than anyone else. They call themselves the United Human Systems, but they're not a system, not really. They're a crusade, the last survivors of the original Terran expansion, the part of humanity that never bowed to the Accord, never signed the treaties, never agreed to equality. Orv narrowed his eyes. We have no record of a Terran expansion, not in any official Accord archive. Arden laughed, once dry and hollow. Of course not. The Accord erased them same way you erase any embarrassment, file it under myth, and move on. Orv didn't flinch, but something in his posture shifted. They were warriors. Arden continued, voice lower. Now fighters. They believed in conquest, survival, legacy. When the Accord pushed for unity and nonviolence, some humans adapted, but not all. The ones who refused to compromise, they vanished into deep space. And they built this fleet. Orvek asked. They didn't build it. They stole it piece by piece, system by system, from old Terran war relics to dead alien empires. No one remembers. They learned from everyone and trusted no one. You know what I saw when I ran into them. What a crew that bled their own captains to avoid surrender. Soldiers who injected themselves with combat serums, banned even in rim space, and a ship AI that asked me not for a password, but for a confession. Orv's jaw tightened. You're lying. I wish I was, Arden said grimly. Back aboard the ISS Helldiver, Commander Grant stood in the cryochamber bay, staring at the rows of pods that lined the walls, silent, cold coffins of the first-gen Terran elite soldiers, veterans of the Exodus War, kept alive, kept frozen, waiting for orders that never came until now. Behind him, a voice entered quietly. It was Dr. Urich, pale, gaunt, and precise. They're waking slower than expected, he said. How long? Grant asked. 3 cycles, give or take. Some of their neural interfaces were degraded, memory rot. We may lose a few. Grant turned. "We only need a few, just enough to remind them who we are." Urek looked at the nearest pod. "You really think the Accord will listen after this?" "No," Grant said. "That's not the point. They don't have to listen. They just have to remember." Outside the Hell Diver space burned, the human fleet had already knocked out 2 more satellite stations and was pushing toward the planetary shield of Athela Prime, a supposed stronghold of the Accord's strategic command commander. Grant didn't slow down. He knew what came next. The historians would wake up scrambling for context, sifting through classified logs and sanitized reports. They'd try to trace the human's origin, but they'd never find the full picture because the real history was written in ash and screams in the silence. That followed orbital bombings too brutal to record at the Accord's central nexus, buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and polished silver towers. Archivist Darrell was shaking. He'd uncovered a report marked Phantom Directive Red Clearance, only it had taken him half his career to even know such a label existed. The document was incomplete, riddled with censorship lines and erased timestamps, but one phrase kept coming back over and over, burned into the margins in bold, red ink: "Humanity must not remember what it was." Darrell ran his fingers through his thinning hair and stood moving towards the headmaster's office. He'd never gone above level 4 protocol before. This was suicide, but he had to speak. He had to tell someone that the Accord wasn't under attack by a forgotten race. It was being punished by one in the war room of Adran. Bev General Corrin stood before a 3D projection of human fleet maneuvers. He had been silent for nearly a full cycle, watching, calculating beside him. Defense Commander Kellen had returned with new data. Intercepted internal comm logs from the Hell Diver. One word keeps coming up: reckoning. Corrin nodded slowly. "They're not just attacking, they're sending a message. Each strike is a page in a history book we burned." Kellen hesitated. "There's more go on. Our sensors found something unusual buried in one of their cruisers. Is an artifact very old, resonates with the same tech frequency as Precord Terranae. It's broadcasting a neural signal." Corrin turned fully, eyes wide. "To what? We don't know. Nothing local, but it's transmitting into deep space." Corrin took a long breath. "They're calling others." Kellen didn't answer. Corrin stepped closer to the holomap. "This isn't just a fleet, it's a warning shot." Arden sat alone in his cell, the data pad now glowing softly in the dark. He replayed the voice of Grant again and again. "You forgot us." He hadn't forgotten. He had run because he remembered too well, and deep down part of him respected them. The Hell Diver, the Black Fleet, the way they moved without apology. The Accord had built its empire on compromise and diplomacy. But humans were never made for either. They were made to adapt, to evolve through trauma. And when left alone too long, they didn't fade, they sharpened. Arden looked up at the ceiling. "You're not myths," he whispered. "You're the last honest thing in this galaxy." Then he grinned and started planning how to get off this rock. The cryochambers groaned with age tubes, hissed vats of thick red-pink preservation gel, drained with slurping gurgles, as alarms buzzed, quietly warning of biological anomalies, temperature surges, and heart rate spikes. Commander Grant stood on the metal walkway above it all, watching his ghosts return to life. There were 6 in this batch, elite Terran soldiers from before the Accord's rise, men chosen not for loyalty, but for results. They weren't bred in tubes, they weren't raised in peace. They were survivors of the Exodus campaign, a war so savage that it was buried under layers of forged treaties and historical redactions. As the first pod cracked open, a low, wet breath echoed through the chamber. The man inside stumbled forward, body trembling, eyes adjusting to the dim red light. Muscles, like steel cables, flexed under scarred skin. His head was shaved, and a deep wound across his left temple pulsed faintly, like something had tried to regrow and failed. "Name?" Grant asked coldly. The soldier looked up, his voice rasped, bone-dry. "Stryker." "Welcome back." Stryker didn't smile, he didn't speak. He looked around the chamber, noted the unfamiliar tech, then locked eyes with Grant. It true?" he asked. "The Accord still exists?" "Yes. and they erased your name that lit something in Stryker, a slow curl of fury in his jawline like a fire, rekindling in a long-dead furnace. Grant pointed to the next pod. Your brothers are waking, you'll brief them, you'll lead the first ground incursion. Target Valdros, Accord City, fortified symbolic. Why symbolic? Grant's eyes went hard. They built it on old Terran bones. Stryker said nothing. He simply walked toward his awakening team, already stretching, coughing, blood and laughing. At the same time, all of them bore the same marks, surgical implants burned, scarring the hardened muscles of those who fought gravity for sport. One of them, a hulking dark-skinned man with a shattered jaw wired together by auto steel, spoke through a vocalizer. What's the kill count, boss? As high as it needs to be. Stryker replied. The past was coming back, and he wanted blood. In the upper council dome of Accord Prime, the ministers were breaking down. Minister Elen had started shouting an hour ago. Now he sat hunched, muttering about nuclear fail-safes and ancient fail-safe codes. No one remembered. Minister Darrell, recently promoted, dropped a set of uncovered files on the central table. This is not just a fleet, this is history retaliating. You silenced the old war, you sealed the Phantom Directive, you erased every record of resistance. Minister Talon snapped back. We had to. The people wanted peace. What were we supposed to do? Give the next generation nightmares? Darrell didn't flinch. You gave them fantasy, while a legion of real nightmares waited just outside your sanitized walls. A silent alert pinged the council screens, breaking Valdos under immediate threat. Human ships entering lower orbit ground. Insertion anticipated. The room fell dead quiet. No negotiation. One asked. Darrell shook his head. You don't negotiate with a firestorm, you run, or you burn on the edge of Valdros City. The civilian evacuation was already collapsing. Sirens wailed as automated shuttle systems jammed from overload. Parents shoved children into bunkers. Military exo-suits jogged through streets trying to maintain order, but the people had seen the news feeds. They knew Valdos was built atop the ruins of an old Terran resistance city, once called Fracture Point. The Accord had said it was symbolic peace, a monument. But now the myth was tearing through the clouds in drop ships, like black hammers above it all. An old veteran named Marshal Derrick stood on the watchtower, gripping the rail so tightly his fingers bled. He remembered Fracture Point. He had been one of the few who fought in the silent campaign, the secret war that cleared out the last Terran rebels. He thought it was justified then, but now they were back. They're coming in fast, his spotter said beside him, scanning the sky with trembling hands. Estimated insertion in less than 6 minutes. Derrick didn't answer. He just stared at the black dots streaking toward them faster than anything the Accord had ever fielded. He'd once ordered the execution of surrendered Terran soldiers at this very site. The Accord called it preventative, he called it murder. Now the past had returned to collect its debt. When the drop ships hit the surface, the ground didn't shake. It ripped. Valdros wasn't a battlefield, it was execution stage. Stryker was the first off the ramp. Plasma bolts flew immediately. Accord soldiers polished and clean opened fire with discipline. An order. The Terran team didn't answer with formation, they answered with rage. Stryker's rail gun tore through cover and armor alike. His brothers moved in brutal sync, breaking ranks, flanking like predators, using shadows and chaos like an art form. One soldier leapt 5 stories up a vertical wall, landing amidst snipers with a kinetic axe. 2 died before they could scream. Another hurled a breach grenade into a command tent, then walked through the flames with blood on his boots. It wasn't war, it was memory made physical. Stryker found Marshal Derrick on the tower. Their eyes met across the smoke. I remember you, Stryker said. Derrick raised his rifle. Then you remember why we did what we did. You tried to end us. Derrick fired the bull. It never reached. Stryker moved a blur of motion, and in seconds had Derrick on the floor, pinned, blade drawn. You buried us in myth, Stryker hissed. But we are not ghosts. We are the price of your peace. He plunged the blade deep, far above, on the Hell Divers' Bridge Grant watched the live feed. He saw the terror in the city, the fire in the streets, the way the Accord's order crumbled under real war. But more than that, he saw something else. His legacy for decades, humans had been written out of galactic memory, edited into stories of diplomacy and moral lessons. But now every explosion, every cry, every panic, Accord broadcast was rewriting that history, and this time it would not be forgotten. The city of Valdos was dying in pieces. Buildings collapsed in clouds of alloy and screams. Drone towers blinked offline one by one. The once pristine streets paved with pride and policy were now split and bleeding. Fires crackled in the oxygen-rich air as bodies lay where they fell. Stryker wiped his blade clean on a fallen Accord flag, stepping over rubble as he led his unit toward the central command dome. They'd breached every strong point. This last structure was different. It didn't defend itself. It hummed. A strange low-frequency pulse vibrated through the ground beneath their boots. Stryker knew the rhythm wasn't natural. It reminded him of something old, forgotten. Commander, one of his men said, a scarred soldier named Cray. Our scanners picked up a vault beneath the dome, shielded, ancient. We had to manually bypass half a dozen code walls just to read it. Terran. Stryker asked. Cray shook his head. Number, Accord, encryption, layered over something older. Stryker's eyes narrowed. Get the breach gear. The dome doors were triple reinforced, but the Terran breachers weren't. Subtle explosives rang out, and in less than 2 minutes the dome was open. Inside, a short corridor descended into blackness. Cray lit a torch and raised it. High glyphs lined the walls, familiar to no one but Stryker. He spoke the word like it hurt. Exodus protocol. The other soldiers paused. You sure? Cray asked. Yeah, Stryker replied. I saw it once during the purge of Titan's reach. It means this place holds a seed, a truth too big to erase. They didn't delete it. They buried it. They descended in silence above ground. Accord reinforcements arrived too late. Dropships came down cautiously. Most were civilian shuttles with jury-rigged guns, piloted by reservists and half-trained militia. The Accord was not built for war, not like this. Commander. Kellen stood in a battered mobile ops truck, parked outside the smoldering remains of the city walls, watching as fragments of his once great city burned. He opened a secure channel to General Corrin. They've breached the vault. Corrin's voice came through raw and strained. How deep? Past level 4 encryption. They'll reach the core. Silence. Then Corrin's voice returned, heavy with resignation. Initiate protocol blackout. If they access what's in that core, this war will turn from history to prophecy. Kellen stared down at the activation key in his hand. Black out protocol meant wiping the core, erasing the oldest files, even at the risk of causing a fusion overload. I need full authorization. Kellen replied. You have it. Stryker and his men reached the bottom of the vault, where a circular chamber waited, cool, pristine, untouched by war. The pulse was louder now, not just sound, but thought. A hum in the skull at the center was a data obelisk, 10 FT high, floating, humming, rotating slowly. It bore the Terran seal, an old-world insignia long lost to time, a closed fist around a broken chain. Cray stepped forward, scanner in hand. It's not broadcasting, it's absorbing. Absorbing what? Another asked. Everything, Cray replied. Tactical data, communications, fleet positions, civilian patterns. Accord encryption. It's pulling their world into itself. Stryker stepped close and placed his hand on the obelisk. Instantly, his mind filled with pain, not memory. History images exploded behind his eyes. Humans kneeling before Accord. Tribunals, executions, broadcast as necessary. Peacekeeping, mass relocations of Earth's loyalists, orbital silencing of resistance, satellites. It hadn't been negotiation. It had been conquest. Accord hadn't absorbed humanity into a peaceful coalition. It had neutered them, stripped them of their war-born culture, labeled strength as danger, filed pride as instability. And those who refused to bow were marked for deletion. The voluntary resettlement was a lie. The great exodus wasn't humanity leaving the galaxy. It was the Accord kicking them out. and now the exiles had returned to finish the sentence. Stryker's eyes opened, blood ran from his nose, the obelisk pulsed once, and a hidden panel slid open. Inside was a data shard, pure crystal, embedded with AI neural mapping. Cray reached for it. That's when the alarm screamed above. Kellen hit the blackout switch. The core vault's stabilizers began to flash red. Stryker felt the air pressure shift. Cray grabbed the shard. We're leaving. The team sprinted up the corridor. As the obelisk began to glow, static licked the walls. A low growl of energy built into a scream. By the time they burst into the open air, the vault behind them collapsed inward with a roar that split the earth. Dust mushroomed into the sky. A crater formed where history had once stood, but Stryker was already transmitting the shard's date back to the Hell Diver. Grant received it with quiet pride. Well done, he said. Stryker's voice came over the comms. They tried to erase us, we just erased their lie. Across the Accord, panic spread. The date, a fragment now decrypted by Terran AI, was being leaked through every channel, every unprotected line, every satellite. Civilians saw it. Soldiers saw it. The illusion cracked. People saw the executions, the tribunals, the memory ed. They saw what peace had cost. Riots broke out on Artemis. Prime protests surged in Reliant Spire's Accord. Soldiers began deserting, unwilling to die for a truth they no longer trusted on the Hell Divers' bridge. Grant watched it unfold. This is just the beginning, he said. A young officer turned to him. What now, Commander? Grant didn't hesitate. Now we show them what we really are. It started with whispers, not commands, not orders, just the murmuring undercurrent of something breaking across the inner systems of the Galactic Accord sectors. Once gleaming with the polished control of diplomacy, began to flicker with uncertainty. Soldiers stationed in comm zones refused to report for duty. Civilians flooded the net with the leaked data. The disbelief turning to fury, then to action. In the heart of one such world, Syrian 3, a young military lieutenant named Drex marched into his commanding officer's office and laid his badge on the table. You're quitting, the officer asked, jaw-tight voice cold. Drex didn't blink. Number I'm remembering, and I won't kill for a lie anymore. Others followed. Some were arrested, some vanished. But the fires of rebellion were already lit. The Accord was unraveling, not through force, but through the return of truth back on ISS. Helldiver. Commander Grant stood in the tactical vault, reviewing the spread of fractures across Accord space. His officers flanked him. Marlowe, Dr. Urek, Stryker, still marked by the smoke and dust of Valdros. They're falling faster than expected, Urek noted, tracing the analytics. No, Grant corrected. They're remembering faster than expected. Stryker grunted. You show a man who he really is, and sometimes he'll burn down the world that told him otherwise. They'll try something desperate, Marlowe added. We hit Valdros hard, we exposed the vault, but if they still have central command intact, they'll counter-strike. Grant said. Urek nodded. Not just with weapons, with legacy. Grant raised an eyebrow. Explain. They'll send someone who believes the Accord is still worth saving. A diplom at a symbol, not to sue for peace, but to shame us, to make us the aggressors again. Grant's eyes narrowed, then let them come. 2 days later, the envoy ship arrived. It was unarmed, painted in Accord white. Its engines cooled as it approached the Hell Diver. It came alone, broadcasting a signal across open channels. Envoy, on behalf of Accord, High Council, diplomatic immunity requested. No weapons, no escort. Grant watched the transmission. Bring it aboard, he said, but search it first. If I smell a bomb, we blast it out of the sky. The shuttle docked. The boarding team reported it clean. Grant waited in the airlock chamber. As the door hissed open, the envoy stepped out, tall, thin, armored in ceremonial cloth over light synth weave. His eyes were sharp. Not afraid, not ashamed, Commander Grant, he said evenly. I am Counselor Varn of the Accord. Grant studied him. You're the first to look me in the eye and not flinch. Vaughn tilted his head. Because I'm not here to beg, I'm here to understand. Grant turned and led him down the corridor, flanked by armed tur. You came to the wrong place for empathy. I came to the right place for truth, Varn replied. If half of what's been uncovered is real, the Accord owes you more than a ceasefire. They reached the war table. Varn looked around at the human warriors, the brutal simplicity of their weapons, the scarred map of the galaxy, marked in red and gray. This is what survival looks like to you, he asked. No. Grant said this is what forgetting us created. Vaughn placed a data chip on the table. I have the original Exodus logs, the true ones, not the Council verified summaries. I want you to see what we were afraid of. Stryker stepped forward, growling. We know what you were afraid of us. Vaughn didn't blink. You're wrong, we were afraid of ourselves. Grant took the chip and inserted it into the display. Footage flickered to life. Earth, last era of the pre-Accord age. Not war, not chaos, experiments, black sites, human augmentation, artificial evolution, children bred for pain resistance, neural loops used to suppress empathy, warm as with live fire, death, matches. We were building monsters, Varn said quietly. Not heroes. The Accord stepped in, because we feared we were creating a species that couldn't coexist with anything, not even itself. No, Stryker muttered, you feared we'd win, that we'd never stop it. Coexistence, that we'd rewrite the stars in our image. Wouldn't you? Varn asked. Grant stepped between them. You want to negotiate? He said, but you brought history, not terms. Vaughn met his gaze. Because I want to offer more than terms, I want to offer redemption. That made Grant laugh, cold and sharp. We were left to die in the void. Our name became myth. And now you want redemption? No, Varn said. I want integration, not the Accord's way, your way. The new Accord will not survive unless you help rebuild it as founders, as equals. The room fell silent. You want us to save the thing that erased us? Stryker asked. I want you to lead it, Varn answered. Grant turned away, staring at the fleet map. The Helldiver still pulsed with combat energy. He could launch strikes right now, burn 10 cities before anyone blinked. But war was never the goal. Memory was, and now the enemy was asking to remember with them. You're bold, Grant said finally. But if you're lying, I won't need to. Varn said, because if I'm wrong, none of us will be left to lie later alone in the war chamber. Grant reviewed the Exodus files again. They were monsters, yes, but monsters built by fear, by manipulation, not by nature. The Accord didn't stop war. They stopped the mirror now. For the first time, someone was willing to look back, but trust would not come easy. And the fleet still hungered. The fleet was silent, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had changed. The envoy's words had rippled through every rank of the Terran fleet like a shot to the chest. Redemption, integration, lead the Accord. The idea alone was enough to throw steel-hearted veterans into questioning everything they'd fought for. On the Helldiver, Commander Grant stood alone in his quarters, staring at the old insignia. Pinned to the wall, a simple black triangle surrounding Earth's shattered outline. It had been sewn onto every uniform back during the Exodus, a reminder of exile, of rage. But now someone had asked them to lead instead of conquer. The idea made his stomach twist. A chime interrupted his thoughts. Grant tapped the console. Yes, Stryker's voice came through, low and raw. We need to talk, it's not good. Grant met him in the lower barracks, where the elite were already in full argument. Cray, the team's explosive specialist, had ripped a terminal from the wall in frustration. This is a trap. They fear us. They always feared us. That's why they locked us out of history. And now we're just supposed to help them fix what they broke. They didn't break it, snapped Voy, one of the ship's deep intel operators. We did every time we slaughtered them without hesitation. Every time we razed a city to make a point. They're not asking us to be weak. They're asking us to help them stop making the same mistakes. Gray turned to her. You were born after the Exodus. You didn't see what they did. And you didn't see the people cheering us in Valdo's Vale. Shot back, half of them were ready to join us. That means something. Stryker didn't try to stop them. He looked to Grant. They're splitting, sir. Someone to push through and burn what's left. Some are listening to what Vaughn said. Grant nodded slowly. What about the civilian sectors we liberated? Confused. Stryker answered, grateful but nervous. They want peace, but peace without remembering the cost. Isn't peace, it's sedation. Another voice spoke up from the shadows. Marla. Arms crossed, we've been hardwired for vengeance, for legacy. This integration is going to test every piece of who we are. We were never meant to govern anything. We were meant to survive and destroy. That was the truth. Grant feared most humans were the perfect weapon when abandoned, but now that the war was turning, could they really be something more? Could they forgive? Could they trust? Before he could respond, alarms howled through the ship. Internal security breach. Deck 9. Bialt compromised. Grant snapped into motion. Move. They raced down the corridors, boots thundering on steel. When they reached Deck 9, what they found froze them. All the biovault was open. Inside, a body lay in a pool of blood. It was Dr. Urich, dead, throat slashed, still warm. Cray stepped forward, scanning the data node beside him. Someone copied the entire bioweapon schematic folder, including the prototype nanopage. Strain, we swore to never deploy. Grant's face hardened. Check the logs. Who accessed this? Vel pulled up the list. Her face went pale. It was Cray. Every weapon in the room turned on the explosive specialist. Cray didn't move. He didn't flinch. They were going soft, he said, voice disturbingly confident. Urek was about to disable the contingency systems. You think I didn't see it? We were one speech away from turning into diplomats. You murdered our own Striker, growled, stepping forward. And for what? So you could push us back into annihilation. Craig laughed bitterly. You really believe they'll ever accept us? The Accord is built on weakness. You can't negotiate with something that's already decided. You're the devil. You stole the nano-age. Grant said cold. Where is it? I didn't steal it. Craig said. He held up a small device. I released it for a heartbeat. Time froze. Then the alarms changed. Biohazard. Breach. Hull level 2. Air circulation contaminated. Lockdown in progress. No vial, whispered. You fool. Grant roared, lunging forward. He slammed Cray against the vault wall. You just signed our death sentence. It's not for us. Cray gasped through broken teeth. I deployed it on an Accord medical station, one we passed 2 days ago. Not military, civilian. It'll hit in less than 20 hours. Why? Stryker shouted to remind them who we are. Craig said, defiant to the last, the monsters they buried. Grant stepped back, fists clenched. Contain him. He ordered. Quarantine him, lock him down. And if he so much as coughs, flush the chamber. As guards hauled Cray away, Vale turned to Grant. We can stop the spread maybe, but not before the Accord finds out. Stryker added, and when they do. Grant said grimly, Varn's offer is dead. Indeed, it was already unraveling on Accord Prime. The reports came in dozens of civilians falling ill on Station Iron, their flesh collapsing inward, bones liquefying. Minutes, all signs pointed to a tailored human bioweapon. Minister Darrell slammed his fist on the council table. They sent us their terms and responded with a massacre. There's no peace to be had. Varn recently returned from the hell. Diver tried to speak. It wasn't sanctioned. I spoke to Grant myself. Then your precious Grant lost control. Talon spat. Their war machines. Vaughn broken. Now let's finish what we started. Wait. Vaughn said, desperate. Give me one last channel, one direct line. Why? Because if he's still the man I saw, he'll choose to fix it. Grant stared at the flashing console in his war room. Private channel, Accord encryption. Only one person it could be. He tapped it. Varn's face appeared, haunted, furious. You promised, he said. I didn't authorize it. Grant replied. You deployed it from your fleet, Varn hissed. And it hit children. Grandchildren. Grant said nothing for a long time, then finally, tell me what you want. Call back your fleet, deliver the antidote, publicly admit what happened, show us you're not what we buried. Grant leaned forward. And if I don't, then we burn everything, Varn said, and we make sure no one ever forgets what you became in the medbay. The nanopage culture flickered. Under containment, Vel worked furiously, replicating antibodies from Legacy Terran strain day. To Stryker entered silently. How bad? He asked. Bad, she replied, but not irreversible. If we push it out now, we can save most of the station, maybe all. And if we delay, we lose everyone, and the Accord comes back with nukes. Stryker looked at her for a long moment. then nodded. Do it hours later. The Accord received a broadcast from Grant himself. He appeared without armor, without weapons. Behind him, the Terran medical wing. I am Commander Grant of the United Human Systems. A crime was committed by one of our own. Against innocence, against you. He stepped aside. Vel uploaded the antidote across open channels. We are not here to conquer, not anymore. We came to remind you who we were, but today we choose who we will be. He looked into the camera. Don't remember us for the burn, remember us for the fire. We refused to. Brett Accord response was hesitant, but Varn pushed the council hard and slowly. Flags lowered, war orders were paused, and the question became real. Could the myth of humanity return, not as a terror, but as a leader? The war room of the ISS Helldiver had never been so quiet. Outside its hull, the Terran fleet floated in perfect formation, their engines silent, their guns powered down across the stars. Accord vessels battered, uncertain, but still standing, held their distance, watching, waiting. The broadcast had gone through. The antidote had worked for now. The bloodshed had paused, but peace was not guaranteed, because within the Helldiver something far more volatile simmered. Grant sat alone at the central command table. No armor, no weapon, just him, the stars, and the unbearable weight of what came next. Footsteps echoed behind him. Stryker fleets in stand. By Stryker said, Accord ships are holding their line. They haven't advanced, but they haven't retreated either. Grant didn't turn. What about our own? He asked. Stryker hesitated, mixed, half want to follow through with your decision. Accord are neutral, the rest think you've lost your spine. Grant finally turned. His eyes were dark, heavy. Maybe I did. Stryker walked to the window. You did what none of us could have imagined. You showed them mercy. After what they did, after what we became because of them, they weren't all guilty, Grant said. Neither were we, Stryker replied. But we still paid the full price. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Stryker spoke again, quieter. Now you were always the visionary, the one who thought we could build something after all the burning. I followed you because I believed in that vision. Grant nodded, and now Stryker stepped forward, looking him dead in the eye. Now I need to believe again. Grant exhaled slowly. You think I made the wrong call? Stryker didn't flinch. I think you made the only call, but it broke something in the ones who followed us this far, expecting revenge. There was a long pause, then Grant stood. Then we talked to them. The Helldivers' hangar had been converted into a war forum. Dozens of elite Terran officers stood in tight rows, battling, hardened, scarred, some still marked by Valdo's campaign. They eyed Grant and Stryker with a mix of loyalty and suspicion. Grant stepped up to the platform. I know what you're thinking. I saw it in your faces when the antidote went out, when the message of apology was broadcast. I felt it. He paced slowly. You think I betrayed our purpose, that I bent a knee to the same people who erased us, who made us monsters. You think I handed them our legacy when we should have taken theirs. The room was dead quiet. Grant looked out across them. All you're not wrong. That shocked them. He let it settle. But here's what you're wrong about, thinking we lost something. We didn't surrender. We showed them something they couldn't imagine, that we could choose not to kill. He stepped closer to the edge of the platform. They buried us in myth because they feared we would burn the galaxy. And for a long time we nearly did, but now they've seen the truth. Grant's voice rose. They saw what happens when the worst part of humanity chooses to lead instead of destroy. A murmur ran through the ranks. Stryker stepped forward. Now, you want legacy. This is how we claim it, not with rubble, but with remembrance, with power, with a seat at the table. They once denied us, and if they ever try to erase us again, he drew his sidearm and fired into the air. They'll remember why they feared us in the first place. Now the room was alive. Fists raised, cheers broke out. It wasn't soft, it wasn't forgiveness, it was dominion earned across the Accords. Core worlds broadcasts spread. The Terran have issued a proposal, a new coalition, not ruled, not conquered, led not the Accord of old, something new forged in war, forged in truth on Accord. Prime Counselor Varn stood before the high table. Grant's message wasn't submission, it was command. He knows what he's offering, and the people ours, and his are listening. Minister Darrell sneered. Their thugs trained weapons. You expect us to rebuild alongside them. I Expect we must. Varn said. You saw what they did to Valdos. I did, Farn replied. And I saw what we did first. The chamber fell silent. Then Talon spoke, old and bitter. If we accept this coalition, we admit we were wrong. Yes, Varn said, exactly. And for once no one disagreed. Weeks later, a sum. It was held not on Accord's soil, not on Terran warships, but on neutral ground. Fracture Point. The rebuilt core of Valdos Grant arrived in plain uniform, no weapons behind him. Stryker and a small escort. Vaughn greeted them with a nod. He wore no crest, no council robes, just truth. The people gathered, not just leaders, but civilians, ex-soldiers, rebels, historians. They watched, breath held. Grant stepped forward. We are the ones you forgot. He began. The myths, the monsters, the lost. But today we return. Not with vengeance. He looked around at Stryker, at Vaughn, at the stars. But with a future applause followed, not wild but real. From that moment, the new galaxy began. Not an Accord, not an empire, but something unthinkable. A year ago, unity born from the ashes. Later that night, under the broken skyline, Stryker stood alone on the old battlements of Fracture Point. Grant approached him. Not bad for a couple of war dogs. Stryker chuckled. Still not sure we're fit for diplomacy. We're not, Grant said, but we're fit for truth. They looked out at the city. It burned no more. It lived, and somewhere in the stars the myth of humanity was being rewritten, not with fear, but with fire that warmed instead of consumed. They had returned, and this time they would not be forgotten. 10 years had passed, 10 long, quiet, volatile years, since the day Fracture Point became more than a battlefield, since it became a beacon. The world hadn't changed overnight. Peace never did, but it started there. What rose from the ashes of the Accord wasn't another empire or a grand new civilization wrapped in glowing banners and ceremonial speeches. It was raw, messier, real. They called it the Conquered of Ashes, a name coined not by a politician, but by a child from the ruins of Valdos who had watched her family survive 2 wars. The name stuck. It carried truth. It didn't pretend the past hadn't happened. Instead, it wore it like a scar. The conquered didn't rule. It remembered. Every planet brought its wounds to the table. Terran exiles, now referred to as the Firstborn, had representatives, not rulers, not warlords, just voices, clear and defiant. The surviving Accord members kept their infrastructure, their science, their order, but they no longer imposed it from above. Instead, everything had to be earned. Grant didn't attend the forums anymore, not out of arrogance, but necessity. His presence still shook too many rooms for some. He was a hero for others, a ghost with too much blood behind his eyes. He lived quietly now off-world on a settlement planet called Argon, where the air was clean, and the forests thick with pale blue trees that hissed softly in the wind. He lived alone. Most days were simple. He tended to old war gear, converted a broken land freighter into a home, and spent hours walking through the valleys without a weapon on his back. But peace, he knew, wasn't the absence of violence. It was a lull, a breath, one he would never truly trust. So when the courier drone landed on his platform with a sealed Conquered sigil, he already knew something had changed. He opened the message, slowly scanned the text. Read the name at the bottom, Stryker. It had been nearly 5 years since they last spoke after the Conquered's birth. Stryker had been tasked with a different role, one Grant didn't envy. He had become the keeper of memory, the one responsible for collecting, archiving, and publicly verifying every war crime committed by both the Accord and the Terran exiles. He didn't redact, he didn't justify, he just recorded. It broke him slowly, but he never quit now. The message was short. It simply read, it's happening again, you need to see this. The transport to New Valdos took less than a day. When Grant arrived, he found Stryker waiting, older, grayer, but no less sharp. They embraced briefly. It wasn't warmth, it was history. They walked together into the newly rebuilt archives dome, formerly the ruins of the old Accord Tribunal complex. Now it housed every file, audio record, confession, and image from the Exodus, the Suppression Wars, and the Firestorm campaigns. Stryker, led him past the public corridors into the restricted level. "What are we looking at?" Grant asked. Stryker handed him a tablet, a signal buried under layers of old Terran encryption, same code frame as the Lost Fleet. Grant stopped the Lost Fleet. Stryker nodded. The Black Horizon group, the ones who refused the ceasefire, even after Valdo's. We never caught them. We assumed they were dead. "What changed?" "We intercepted a pulse," Stryker said. "Not just a location ping. A rally call." Grant stared at the screen. The transmission was short, but unmistakable. "The Accord sleeps, the conquered kneels. But we still burn. Horizon endures." Beneath the words was an image, a Terran symbol, half fist, half burnt. "Star, they're alive," Stryker said, "and they're gathering." Grant felt something old stir in his chest. "They want to finish the war or start a new one," Stryker said. "Either way, they're not done. And they're using our name to do it later." That night Grant stood outside beneath the darkening sky of New Valdos. Stryker joined him, silent for a while. "Then do we tell the Council?" "Not yet." Grant said. "They'll find out eventually, and when they do they'll panic." Grant replied, "Or worse, they'll start pointing fingers. The conquered is fragile." Stryker, "One spark, and it all goes up again." Stryker looked up at the stars. "You think we should go ourselves?" "I know we should." A long silence passed between them. Then Stryker chuckled. "Old men back at it." "We're not old," Grant said. "We're not young either." Grant smiled. "Just a little." "No," he said, "but we're still necessary." They left at dawn on a black, unmarked ship, armed with nothing but the truth and the ghosts they carried. As the vessel lifted into orbit, Grant looked down at the world that had risen from fire and up into the darkness where fire still waited to fall. There would always be those who burned for destruction, but so long as someone stood between them and the rest of the stars, humanity would never be forgotten again, not as monsters, not as myths, but as what they truly were: fire, memory, choice. And this time they would choose to endure.